Hey guys, what's going on? For those of you that don't know, I'm doing a book a week reading challenge and presenting them in groups of 3. This month it was fantasy because I'm trying to dissolve whatever this unfounded bias is that I have for the genre. So let's start with The Buried Giant by Ishiguro. I've read Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro and I loved it. The guy's prose is effortless to read, which was probably the only reason that I finished this book. It was a bit of a slog. It's set in medieval Europe where a mist has settled upon the land and caused all memories to evaporate. We follow an elderly couple who lives in this underground hovel of a village, and they're being alienated for reasons. They don't let them have a candle in their dark room, so they decide to go and try and find the son that they may have once had, that they kind of know where he lives, and they start their quest. They find an old knight along the way. There's ogres, there's dragons, there's angry villagers, everything you could want from a fantasy story. But it's not your typical fantasy story. I don't think it's a book a lot of people think of when you hear the word fantasy. It's a parable, and I don't know exactly what that means, but a lot of the dialogue seemed contrived, and a lot of the characters just seemed like a little wooden, which I associate with a parable, which I know aren't good things. But it did remind me of The Alchemist, just a very bloated alchemist. There was a lot in the middle that I feel could be cut, but I imagine a lot of the lessons were lost on me. It reminded me of when I read Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders a couple years ago. I knew everything that was happening. I was following the plot, and I kind of had an idea of what the overarching theme he was trying to get at was. But page to page, I was kind of struggling to see where he was aiming me towards, if it was supposed to be just this generic fantasy adventure with a few morals mixed in. I don't know, I think a lot of it was lost on me. So anyways, eventually they figure out that this dragon is causing the memory loss by like breathing it out or something. And they come to a decision of whether or not to slay the dragon, which means to let the memories flow, or to keep the dragon alive, which is to suppress the memories. And of course, in my opinion, it never serves you to suppress a memory because that's who you are. And if you're lying to yourself like that, you're just doing yourself a disservice because nothing's going to make sense if you don't know where you came from and why you're a certain way. Like I mentioned in my top 10 video, I love having a bookshelf with all the books I've read because every spine tells you a little story about your life. And like in my top 10 video, some of those don't have nice, happy stories attached to them. But every story in there made me who I am. So it has its place in my memory, whether it's a good one or a bad one. I think what the title means, The Buried Giant, is the massive amount of shared animosity and hatred and anger that came after the bombings of Hiroshima in World War II, and how as a society, maybe it was best for them to just bury all of that emotion because where was it going to go? There was nothing they could do with that kind of emotion, that kind of hatred, instead of probably just fight each other. There was nothing they could do. Which makes me wonder if there are times where it's best to suppress a memory, to bury a giant pain like that, because what is it going to do for you ultimately? I remember when I first learned that Godzilla was just a symbol for the atomic bomb and how like shocked I was. This whole time I thought Godzilla was just a monster, but here it had this deep cultural significance to it. I was hoping for some variation in the tropes, but it was really just Ishiguro using the fantasy tropes to spin this parable, which is fine. It was fine. It probably doesn't deserve the low score I gave it. The lowest score yet on this channel, by the way. But this last week and a half, it has been cloudy and rainy and entirely sunless. And that was the time I spent reading this book, so that probably has something to do with it. You know, it's supposed to be springtime. I took my shorts out like 2 weeks ago, and now it's just been cold. So maybe I'm a little irritable. Maybe it deserves a little better. Next up, we got one of the Witcher books from Sapkowski. You don't normally see these books in thrift stores. This is the first one I've found. I thought it was a good place to start because you see it says Introducing the Witcher on the bottom there, but it's actually a bunch of short stories that seem to be meant as snacks for people that have read the whole series and have loved the whole series. But luckily I played The Witcher 3 a couple years ago and I loved it, so I knew who the characters were and I knew what the main premise was, so I could slip right into it. And for those of you that don't know, the premise is awesome. The premise is perfect for short stories, and the premise is perfect for a video game. Geralt of Rivia is a Witcher, which is a race that goes around slaying demons and monsters in exchange for money. The world is, again, pretty much medieval Europe with dragons and demons and such. And these stories are all based off fairy tales. You've got like the brutal Snow White and her murderous 7 dwarves, or a mutant Cinderella who kind of goes nuts at midnight and causes some chaos. But the best part about these is they're morally ambiguous. It's not like the demons are always evil. Geralt always starts, he's got a companion, and he finds this village with this farmer, and this goat creature is eating his crops, and Geralt investigates, but actually the goat creature was just defending his land, so maybe it's the farmer that's wrong. Or Geralt is tasked with killing a mutant princess who's going to sully the bloodline, but who is Geralt to kill a more or less human being, you know? Which is what I really liked about this. I don't know if that makes it dark fantasy. I don't know what the subgenres are, but that's something that has definitely turned me off to fantasy, and it's just a stereotype that maybe I need to get over, but that so much of it is here's the good guys, and here are the bad guys. You know, the good guy is this bright white angel thing, and the bad guy is this demon. But I don't know, the moral ambiguity was really refreshing here. It reads really smoothly. There were a few duds in here, but no different than any other book of short stories. Obviously, you could probably guess there was a lot of action scenes in the book, and I don't really like action scenes. I don't know, something about it. It's just like stage direction. People have pointed me in the direction of people that really do action scenes well, but nothing has ever really satisfied me. But that's fine. The thing I can't really forgive this book for is the first chapter. It's not necessarily a sex scene, but more like a foreplay scene. And especially for someone who may not know these characters, they might as well just have sex, big bold letters on the first page. Which I know sex sells, and I know that really amps up the interest, but it seems like a cheap trick, and it just kind of insults me. So that definitely hurt the score a little bit. And before we get to the book I like the most, I did have some DNFs. I actually had a lot of DNFs, which is rare for me. Normally, I will suffer through any book because I like to think that there is merit in every book written. That I like to be able to flex myself to enjoy any book that falls into my hands. So I don't know what changed here. It might be BookTube, in that I feel I don't have the time to waste on books, which is something I'm trying to fight, but is pretty potent. I guess I felt even if I finished these books, that was a slim chance that I'd be happy about describing them to people. I wouldn't be excited to share these books with people, but here I am sharing them now anyways. So we got Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I gave up on this one after the first 20 pages where she was still describing the setting. I don't have a huge patience for meandering at the beginning of a story. I gave it 20 pages. I feel like that was enough. I don't know. Next was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I gave this one 20 pages as well. Kind of read a little YA to me. I think the writing style was good, but it just didn't grab me. I can't say for sure what it was. And the last DNF was Escape on Venus by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Only because after the first 20 pages I realized this was science fiction and not fantasy. And it says so right on the spine there, but I didn't read that. Okay, but the book that I liked the most was one that you recommended, one that I had in my big vintage sci-fi haul. It's The Dying Earth by Jack Vance. This book is set, as you may have guessed, on a dying Earth. The sun is bright red, about to go supernova, so everyone knows the end is near, and they're kind of going nuts. But it actually begins off Earth, on a planet where everyone is biologically creating humans, people, humanoids, I think that's the word. But each scientist has a specialty. One really knows how to make the brain, another really knows how to make the face, another really knows how to make the emotional aspect of a being, and they don't really congeal. So they're making all of these imperfect humans, and the one we follow has a very hateful disposition. They hate beauty, they trample flowers, but she is made aware of this, and she can see that it is a fault of her. She can see that it is a flaw in her, and she goes to this dying Earth to try and figure that out. And I was there for that story. I was all about that story. I was ready for the whole book to be that way. but it's actually a book of short stories, loosely connected short stories. So we get a small glimpse of that, but then we move on to the next one. And they're all entertaining enough, but I feel like a lot of them boiled down to, I am a hero from the unpronounceable land and I must get the unpronounceable amulet of the unpronounceable temple to come back and bring prosperity to my land. Which is fine, which is, you know, like dense fantasy, which I was into, mainly because of Jack Vance's prose. I've read him before and I really liked it. He's got like the perfect amount of spice to his words, where at some points it's like almost a little too much, almost a little too fancy, but it just stays on that threshold the whole time to keep you like perfectly engaged in it. Whereas like H.P. Lovecraft is too spicy. And oftentimes you have to stop reading and just kind of look at the words and say, okay, what is going on here? Or, you know, like Stephen King, which is a little underspiced, may leave you wanting a little bit more, but Jack Vance is perfect. He's got the perfect porridge. That's what really kept me going with this book. I mean, it's not a long one, so it wasn't a big ask. It did make me think about the end of the world. Children of Men is one of my favorite movies. I read the book too, but the movie is actually better, I think. And there is some kind of tipping point where the world is over and people turn into beasts, right? I mean, in this world, the sun turning bright red is a pretty good reason to imagine the world's going to end. But in one like ours, where yes, we can see an end to the world, but it's not the end of the world. And if people still have a say in whether or not the world ends, but enough kind of fall victim to the pessimism that it will end, that there's this tipping point where, oh, well, if it's a dying world, then I might as well litter. If it's a dying world, then who really cares if we spill oil here? If it's a dying world, who really cares if we use up the resources? A perfectly salvageable world could turn into a dying world just because people think it's a dying world, just because people are resigned to the idea that it's a dying world. I don't think there was any intention of Jack Vance saying that kind of thing in this book. But yeah, it was effortless to read, even though some of the stories may have been a little bland. But also it was written in the 50s, I believe. So I definitely gave it a pretty hefty antiquity bonus for the final rating here. I'm glad to have read more Jack Vance. I really did enjoy it. I'm currently sitting next to an absurd mound of books. Let me show you this. I'm using it as a light stand currently, but look at this amount of books I have here. We got new stuff, we got old stuff, there's a few signed things in there. I really want to show it to you. I mean, it's going to be a long video, but I kind of want to wait for 1,000 subscribers because it really should be something celebratory, I think. Maybe that's being optimistic. Maybe we'll see what happens, but yeah. Huge amount of books. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.